Hi, I'm Ariel Basca, host of Ride the Omnibus. Today, our conversation takes us in a number of different directions, from the boroughs of New York City to diversity and inclusion in literature to the good-bad binary of racism. While there are some spoilers for the book ahead, we hope you'll enjoy this conversation. I am joined by Alex.
Hello.
And Brian.
Hello.
To talk about NK Jemisin's The City We Became. NK Jemisin is a sci-fi and fantasy writer who has the distinction of winning the Hugo Award for Best Novel 3 years in a row for all 3 novels in the Broken Earth trilogy, starting in 2016. Additionally, that achievement in 2016 made her the first African American to win Best Novel. She has just won the Hugo Award this year for Emergency Skin in the Best Novelette category. She spends a lot of time talking about her debt to Octavia Butler, another author that we are talking about on this podcast. But I am so incredibly happy that we have an opportunity to talk about NK Jemisin. So thank you guys so much for joining me.
Happy to be here.
Pleased to be here.
We have 2 people who are pretty intimately familiar with different aspects of New York who are joining me on this podcast because I myself have never lived in New York. I don't really know anyone who lives in New York particularly well other than a certain someone on this podcast. This particular story has 5 avatars who represent the different boroughs of New York City. And each of these avatars are supposed to kind of come together as a team of superheroes. And there is a very specific way that each of them is represented. And it's almost American God style, would you say?
Yeah, sure. I mean, they actually do talk about them as being city gods.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like it's somewhat unique.
Very unique and interesting concept. It just took me aback a little to kind of see where it went in terms of how she chose to define each character of the individual boroughs.
My mother is from New York City.
Mm-hmm.
She grew up in Queens, and my mother-in-law is from Long Island. And about half my family on my mother's side still lives in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
My granddad on my mother's side, after he escaped from Hungary, came to Astoria. My grandmother on my mother's side, after escaping from Austria, grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. But that's, and then my dad lived in New York City for a while working for the MTA. But then up until, I guess, 10 years ago, that was the amount of experience I had with the city. I moved to New York City for a PhD in neuroscience. I lived in Manhattan for 5 years and then moved out to Brooklyn. So I have some experience with the city. Certain things ring true or don't quite ring true for me, but maybe I have less of a deep background in the city.
One of the things that Jemisin says in her acknowledgments at the end is that she moved to New York in 2007, and that as a teenager, she visited in the summer, and that kind of mirrors something of my experience. We visited New York frequently when I was growing up. I spent a few weeks up there in the summer sometimes.
More than half of New York City residents weren't even born in New York State.
Right.
There's a lot of immigrants from other countries. There's a lot of transplants from other states.
Yep.
People's families live in New York, leave, and come back. I think New York has a very fluid identity. And for instance, my neighborhood is traditionally an Italian neighborhood, and it's now largely a Chinese neighborhood, but there's people of all backgrounds, lots of immigrants, lots of people from other parts of the city. And I think that's fairly typical. It's a very diverse city. I think only 33% white. Well, there's actually a lot of segregation, which is kind of touched on by the book. There's also a lot of very mixed neighborhoods, and it's becoming more and more mixed. And I think in a lot of ways, what's being talked about as the enemy, gentrification, is not as much the enemy as the book sort of and a lot of people around here believe, where segregated neighborhoods are becoming less segregated. People are living with other people more, and I think that's a positive thing. And I'm happy to justify my perhaps unpopular opinion here, but I think that a lot of that diversity makes it very difficult to personify the boroughs, because the boroughs aren't what New York is made up of. New York is made up of neighborhoods, and there are neighborhoods in Brooklyn that are more like other neighborhoods in the Bronx or more like neighborhoods in Queens. There's neighborhoods in Queens that are like Staten Island or Long Island.
Since we start with Manhattan as kind of our first entree into this book, I mean, we've got Sao Paulo and Manhattan as the first characters that we meet. All three of us, I'm sure, have spent a lot of time in Manhattan. I've definitely spent way more time in Manhattan than anywhere else in New York City. But when you think of the way that he was portrayed in this book, in terms of choice of gender, race, personality, did you say, oh yeah, that's Manhattan?
I was a little unclear on his race and behavior. It changed a lot through the book. I think a few times it said that he was Black, but earlier in the book it said that he was not really Black. Maybe that ambiguity is on purpose. I don't know. Or maybe I was just not understanding.
So I think what happens is that at the beginning of the book, he's got amnesia, this kind of selective amnesia where he doesn't remember who he is. And so the only knowledge that he has of who he is what people see in him. And he seems very racially ambiguous. And as he goes through the book, he seems to develop sort of a sense of, okay, no, I'm definitely Black. I just happen to, and this is an experience I know from being Black, is that depending on where you are, you may look a certain way. So like if you're hanging out with your Hispanic friends, some people who are Black look more Hispanic. Like maybe he even mentions Punjab at one point, where some people look at him and they see, oh, well, you know, you look like maybe you're part Punjabi or part Chinese, and it's just the blend of African features that a lot of African Americans have that lend to some of that flexibility. And I think that she's trying to sort of drive at the deeper history of Manhattan. You know, it's brought up the mass graves that were found in Manhattan, the history of Black people in Manhattan going back hundreds of years. But for the type of story it is, it's an interesting choice. For me, this is probably going to come up a lot. When I think most of us think of Manhattan, we think of the way Hollywood portrays Manhattan. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking like something along the lines of like Futurama with a guy in like a power suit with the white collar and the stripes, and you know he's like some kind of business douche. And instead, we get this African American guy who's come to Manhattan for some purpose, who lives with a roommate who is trans, and he also happens to be bisexual, maybe gay. And that sort of was an interesting mix.
Do you think, though, that captures the really rich, actually, Black history of Manhattan? I mean, Manhattan has been a cultural center in terms of African-American culture, especially Harlem.
Right.
There's the Harlem Renaissance. Malcolm X, he wasn't born in Manhattan, but he became Malcolm X in Manhattan.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the like interesting parts of the book, is that that's not what you exactly think of when most people think Manhattan. But I felt like all of the tidbits that made his backstory, even with his amnesia, richer, were just shoehorned in there. Like at every turn, like she was trying to just pack more of this background in there. And I realize this because we may be a fairly educated audience in that respect. Like we may know those things. People who are picking up this book in the airport may not. And so she may have to kind of go there. But I felt like at every turn, she's trying to like shoehorn in this deep amount of history and knowledge and it made the book like there was some really hard eye rolls for me. Like I'm reading the section and it's like, oh, okay, we're just going to pack it in right now. And it kind of took away from the book.
The boroughs are really complicated, and it's not so simple. There's a lot of history. I don't know. The one thing that got me was when earlier in the story she was talking about an alleyway in Manhattan. I'm like,
The
where's there an
alleyway.
alleyway in Manhattan?
I thought she was making a joke about that. Hey, we don't have alleyways. I'm pretty
Well,
sure
she
that's what
later
she said.
says that there's no alleyways, but there's an actual alleyway earlier on. And I've been all over Manhattan. I've biked all over the city. I've walked all over the city. I think I've seen a alleyway in my history here.
Saw
like
the same one she
one.
saw, I guess.
Maybe, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't in Midtown. So
Yeah, I definitely haven't ever seen one in Midtown. I've definitely traveled through Midtown.
Midtown Manhattan, not so much. And I think there are a few things that pull me out here.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because Jemison moved to the city around when I did, and we haven't lived here that long.
But one of the things about Manhattan that I thought was interesting, that I thought did sort of make me think about Manhattan, was his possessiveness. Like he immediately, he tries to become the one that brings the group together. He tries to take the lead, because that's what most people think of as New York, as Manhattan. And so I thought that was sort of an interesting way to look at it.
But the Brooklyn character would have probably been a better leader.
Yeah, I think she would have been. And I feel like Brooklyn and Queens are almost secondary characters, and
very much. Yeah.
Manhattan and Bronx and Staten Island kind of have their stories more fleshed out and are more present. Like Brooklyn has all the resources essentially in the story, but they don't seem to be as real as the other characters.
I thought that the Becky or Karen or whatever that was the avatar of the sort of alien was actually pretty good. I mean, these people are real in real life, and it is sort of representative of culture clashes that can happen when people live together but don't necessarily want to live together.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I feel like it was talking about people who have always been a part of the city as sort of invaders, and people always move around the city and people always move in various places. That doesn't make them invaders unless they are dismissive of the places that they're living and scared of the people around them, and which happens. I mean, we just recently here in Bay Ridge, we had signs going up talking about Asian people as dirty and invaders and things like that. And it's like this neighborhood has had a strong Asian presence for decades and decades. We're considered one of the three Chinatowns in New York City. And there are still like people here who are looking at others as invaders. But there's sort of a flip side of that, where if somebody who's a white professional moves to a more like black or brown professional neighborhood because they can afford it better, that doesn't make them an invader. It's what they do that makes them a good member of the neighborhood or an invader, I feel. I don't know. Maybe I'm speaking from a place of privilege here. I don't know.
Well, I mean, the example you brought up makes me think of some of the examples I've seen here in DC. I live in Arlington, just outside of DC. And, you would have, like in some situations, you would, like you said, you'd have white people who are gentrifiers, they move in, and then suddenly, like the Asian people who were there already, the newcomers, the ones who are going, well, hey, those people are dirty, like all of a sudden, as if the Asians suddenly haven't been there forever. And it's like, why don't you go back to Asia or whatever it is? And that's the attitude. Here in DC, we had something that happened, I think it was last summer, where a newer building that attracted professionals had gone in, and it was in an area where there was a cell phone store that played go-go music on the street. And go-go music is very much a DC thing, love it or hate it. And someone in that building called the owner, the main company of that cell phone store, and said, hey, can you tell them to stop playing that music? I don't like it. I don't want to hear that kind of music. And
that's reasonable if it's 2 a.m, but
right, the business is closed at 2 a.m. But the corporate head office called and told this guy who'd owned this franchise of this, like, I don't know, Boost Mobile, whatever it was, for like decades, hey, you can't play go-go music anymore.
And he's been
And
playing that for years.
right, decades. Like the reaction was swift. Like people turned down in the streets. They brought huge speakers. They had like a go-go festival in that like neighborhood or something. Like, but it was someone who came into the neighborhood and was new and was like, well, we don't like that. We don't want that. And it's you come in, like you said, some people, not everyone obviously, but they come in, they gentrify, and then they say, well, I don't like the things that are here. I want the things I'm familiar with. And I think that Jemison does a very good job of demonstrating that through some of the other avatars of the woman in white.
Mm-hmm.
When you mentioned the part in Innswood Park with the woman who tries to claim that he and his roommate are
Yeah.
doing something inappropriate, but later when Sao Paulo shows up, there's all these people there and they're having like they're drinking wine and Starbucks and they're talking about, oh, if like it's like the little things that you hear that make you roll your eyes. Like there's something like, oh, if you want to get authentic Dominican food, oh, you go here. Like as if they've discovered this new land that no one's ever been to somehow before, but people are there. And now that they've gotten there, it's arrived. And I thought that part came through, if sometimes hokey, because I felt like the credit card thing, it made sense for Manhattan, but it also felt a little corny.
Yeah.
But it worked. It works better than say some of the things that the Bronx did.
Mm-hmm. I think we should move on to talking about MC Free now. I think that would be a good transition point. As long as we're kind of talking about the different boroughs and how they've evolved. She's the one who has specifically been talked about in the book in terms of her evolution from being a hip hop artist to then becoming this councilwoman in the nice suit and high heels.
One thing, and this I feel like applies to specifically to Brooklyn, but this is very much NK Jemison's vision of New York. It's the New York that she grew up with. It's MC Free is sort of like the New York I grew up with. Like my mom's from Queens. She's from Hollis, Queens. And if you are familiar with the history of rap, Run DMC, LL Cool J, they're all from Hollis, Queens. She went to high school with some of these guys. And so like the image of New York she's invoking by talking about MC Free is this sort of this like callback to like the New York of the 80s and 90s.
But there were also a lot of rappers from other boroughs. Like,
for sure.
I mean, hip hop was potentially born in the Bronx. A lot of big hip hop artists are, well, actually, I can think of one big hip hop artist from Staten Island. Group Wu-Tang Clan is from Staten Island. And of course, you have a lot from Brooklyn as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Including one of the, including a Jewish rap group, the Beastie Boys is from Brooklyn, I believe.
When I was reading this book, like I was thinking to myself, I was like, why didn't she just make all the boroughs rappers?
That would have been a good concept. And Staten Island could have been like RZA or something.
Because this whole book is just Netflix like bait. It's like she's crying out, please give me a Netflix special. There's a Broken Earth. Someone, I think TBS or TNT bought the rights to Broken Earth to make that into a show. That's gonna take forever. You could turn this thing around overnight. This is like an easy win. And so I was reading this book very cynically thinking, oh, this is totally gonna be her NK Jemison's like Netflix special.
Let me ask you this: would it be a bad Netflix special?
As long as she doesn't write the rap, it would be good. Because I felt like Brooklyn's rhymes were a little.
They
weak.
were.
Like,
oh my gosh, they were so like.
She's a sci-fi writer, not a rapper.
I know. I can't rap either. So I was like, okay, you need a little help on the rhymes, but like I thought the concept, like when I imagined Brooklyn's rap battle when she's fighting the exes or whatever they were, was a good. Like I could visualize it. I felt like I was there, rapping skills aside. But I kept thinking to myself, like, where's like the Beastie Boys and Wu-Tang and like where like. it'd be such a fun concept to represent all the boroughs with rappers. Like that would have been hilarious. But I also felt like Brooklyn just gets like she's another example of you can't really represent such a large group of people with one person. And
Yeah.
again, like she just strikes me as like this is NK Jemisin's experience of New York. This is what she's comfortable with, and that's okay. But it doesn't encapsulate, like you said, like the Hasidic Jews, like people from Flatbush, like the Park Slope people. Like I was waiting for like some kind of Park Slope Karen to show up, like all those kind of things.
Which
And I
is
was
like a whole thing. Like I've
yes,
been to community meetings in Park Slope, and it's a special kind of people, the brownstone Park Slope people. And they've
yeah.
been there for years. Our current mayor is granted a transplant, but he's very brownstone Park Slope. Like that is his whole thing. There's no hint of brownstone Park Slope there, and it's the same thing with Queens. Like a lot of the cops, they live in Queens,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and they live on the far outer edges of Queens where it's single family homes and everybody
Mhm.
drives everywhere, and that's a very like Whitestone or something, and that's a very different Queens from, I don't know,
The immigrant up and comer image that she presents in
which
terms of the
definitely
representation.
exists.
Yeah. But
Uh,
there's also the, white privilege that exists there too as a space. So
One of the problems I had with how she does the representations, like I said, like I keep thinking this is how she sees New York, and she's trying to push a conversation. Is that like it really excludes white people from the conversation altogether, which I thought was odd. Like because it doesn't do it in a positive way. Like there's no ally. Like I didn't specifically had a
sure.
problem with all of these representations, 4 out of 5, well 5 out of 6 being people of color. I thought that was great. But I felt like there was no ally, and then like the unintended or maybe intended consequence is that essentially every white person that shows up in the book is evil. And I was just like, okay.
I'm going to defend her here, actually. I'm going to defend her here because, like, as you said, this is her view of New York, and maybe that's her lived experience. Like, a lot of times, a lot of times, um, the white population of New York sort of clusters into white neighborhoods and doesn't really even interact with the more diverse New York. And maybe I'm even guilty of that, even though I'm living in a diverse neighborhood and like going all over the city and involved in various advocacy things. But when a lot of a group doesn't interact, and then a lot of the people who do interact are the worst of that group,
Hmm.
maybe that's the way it is, and that's clearly not the whole story, because like if you look at, for instance, the BLM protests, not the leaders, but a large proportion of the people out protesting are white,
mhm.
right? So there's plenty of allies. There's plenty of people who are happy to sit down for a meal with people from different backgrounds and hear their stories. But there's also those people who used calling the police as a weapon against
Yep.
people of color, and who have no respect for the neighborhoods that they're in, and who weaponize their whiteness.
And
That's a
weaponize
valid
white
thing.
tears like the Karen in the park, and
One thing I thought was missing was is that the, I felt like there should have been a character who was white that either was an ally or like a misguided ally. They think they're doing
Mhm.
the right thing,
Yeah.
but really they're just playing into the larger picture. I felt like that was like an avenue that was missing, because I mean,
Yeah.
you don't
Or
need a
somebody who's like not necessarily a good guy, but's been living there forever. Like in our
right.
neighborhood, we have like a large Italian population, which is frankly kind of racist. But they've been there for 50 years. They're not an invader.
No,
They're,
I
they're
think
you know,
I I guess for me, like when I was reading it too, is like it made me like bringing up the Italians made me think of like sort of like Hollywood's New York, like you think about the cab drivers as like forget about it, and
And
like
the
the Italians,
Godfather.
which is
Yeah,
like no longer a thing. Like your cab driver is his name is likely Muhammad, right?
right. But that in itself too is like, I mean, Hollywood's kind of picked up on that, but like when I think of like New York of the '80s, it's like, it's like stereotypes about Italians, Jewish delis, like you mentioned, um, something maybe Chinatown. Like I was really surprised one of the avatars wasn't Chinatown
Yeah.
or something, or like a Jewish American princess from Long Island or something didn't jump into the mix. But it's not a cartoon series. Like she's trying to like have a conversation about New York. But like you said earlier, Brian, there are so many different groups in New York, and everyone sort of has like their experiences of New York and like what sounds familiar to them and what resonates with them. And this is what resonates with her, and I respect that. But having a large family that is in New York and then being someone who's taken a lot of pop culture, I was kind of wondering where those like touchstones for people.
Or why Queens or the Bronx aren't the rapper, right?
Right, why Queens or Bronx? But can we talk about the Bronx though? Because I
Okay,
have
Yeah.
yeah.
problems with the
Yeah.
Bronx.
Okay. Okay. Let's hear it about the Bronx.
I have families in the Bronx, but so so the Bronx is personified as a older Native American woman who is, I guess, a lesbian.
Yeah.
Did
Yeah.
I get that right?
But who looks ethnically ambiguous and
Right.
passes for lots of different ethnicities at different times. And
As many of us do, I have to
yeah.
say.
Yeah.
But I guess for me, and like this is where I feel guilty, is by the time we're getting introduced to the Bronx, like we've met New York, who is a gay black man. We've met Manhattan, who is possibly a biracial gay black man, or maybe just a gay black man. And now we meet the Bronx, and now we have a almost 70-year-old Native American lesbian artist. And I'm gonna I felt like we hit kind of the trifecta there.
You think it may be too much of a mirror of the author?
Not a mirror of the author, just at this point, like it's like all these characters, like if you were gonna write up like character sheets like some role playing game and you were going to allot points, she's got so many points stacked in the Bronx that it's almost not believable anymore.
Yeah.
And the Bronx and the part where the Bronx like begins to connect with her power and she does it through Native American dance, I pretty much about lost it. Because I was just like, okay, wait a second. You've tied this woman, she's a Lenape?
Yeah.
Indian?
Lenape.
Which is one of the
Okay.
major tribes, but like how many people actually are Lenape in the Bronx, right?
Well, but her connection to the area comes from her historical roots. So like her people left the New York area, Trail of Tears, went to Oklahoma, got it. So she has this like very like a long-standing cultural tie to the area that dates back before, the city. And so she can claim that. But I felt like when we get to representation about Native Americans, and like I can't speak for Native Americans, like I'm like 1% Native American, if that, it becomes this sort of catch-all thing. And it's like a very tricky thing to talk about and write about because she reaches back into her roots and her spirituality, and I'm gonna dance and become one with the earth. Okay, I think we just hit cliche overload for me at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Do you
And
think
it
that
just
it would have been better as a co-written book, where she actually found people from different boroughs and from different backgrounds?
sort of
Because
like
it's just
stories of the boroughs.
yeah, and you would have like the general creative direction, but could write it in an authentic way towards where they're coming from. Because I do think like she's working at a disadvantage here, trying to represent people who are completely different from her.
Well, I think in general, everyone who is a writer has to write about experiences that are not their own unless they're only going to write memoir for the rest of their lives.
But when you're trying to make a representation of a group of people, it's hard when you're not that group of people.
I think that, I mean, it would have been an interesting concept to write it with different people from like different boroughs and backgrounds. But I mean, I'm happy that she's tried to write people
Yeah.
from different experiences. Like for instance, as a Black person who reads sci-fi, I get really fed up when I see someone And that kind of goes to the sad puppies argument, sort of when someone's a writer and they go, oh, but yeah, I don't feel comfortable writing about characters of colors. I don't know their experience. And I'm just like, we're human beings. If you're writing in the distant future, who the fuck cares what color the character it is? But, I get tired of reading about a ton of white people. I just want to feel like we're still present in the future.
The authors have a sort of responsibility to talk to people from that background, get them to review the book, and make sure that they're not too far off.
I think for me with the Bronx, I think you're right. You have a responsibility to sort of try to speak to truth and I think she did her research. I just felt like that was a stretch. I was like, wow, okay, you found a unicorn. I mean, and granted, all these Borough people have to be essentially unicorns, right? They're special, but when you get to how the Bronx is portrayed and her background, her attitude is right. That felt like the Bronx to me. But when you get to her in that book, and we've already dealt with Manhattan's roommate, the trans man, Vietnamese, British, and trans, and speaks like a chav or something. That part really pulled me out. But then I felt like when you get to this character, it snapped my believability. It's like suddenly I'm like, okay, wait a minute, what are we doing here to the Bronx? And now she's going to dance because she's got this innate connection with the earth because she's Native American. I'm just kind of like, come on, I feel a smidge insulted somehow.
When the alt artists come into her gallery, this group of obviously alt-right people protesting the whole concept of diversity, etc., it was very clear that NK Jemisin was sending up the sad puppies, who you already referenced there. And just to explain to people who may not be aware, the sad puppies were actually an unsuccessful alt-right anti-diversity voting campaign that intended to influence the outcome of the Hugo Awards. It was actually started by Larry Correa in 2013, who wanted to nominate his own novel and suggested slates that would benefit him and other white male authors as much as possible. The irony is that to this day, NK Jemisin actually credits the sad puppies with splitting the vote to give her her first Hugo Award in 2016 for the first of the Broken Earth trilogy. But when you look at the characterization of everybody, it seems like she deliberately wrote this book to piss off the sad puppies.
Is that such a bad thing, though?
I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying when Alex is saying that she, went, on the character sheet, I mean, it really is literally step by step, every individual diverse trait that would piss off one of the members of that group, somebody has in this book.
To be clear, I really liked that scene. I thought that scene was great.
Okay.
And I don't know. I liked that scene. I thought it was a really good representation of the alt-right, and I thought that
I know, I like the alt-right part.
I think we all agree that the alt-right part absolutely worked. I'm just saying that when I got to that part, it made me rethink the characterizations a little bit. But I did think her send-up of the sad puppies as these alt-right artistes.
Yeah.
Who their only good piece was the one written by the intergalactic or interdimensional invader, right?
Right.
Which I kind of enjoyed.
I think it's good that she was able to kind of get that jab at them, and I enjoyed that part. But I just felt like at some point it was just an interesting reading, and I think you make a good point, Ariel. I was reading it, I'm just thinking, okay, wait a minute. Almost every character in this book now is a member of what we jokingly call in my house the Burger King Kids Club. And the Burger King Kids Club is a thing from the 90s where they had all the characters and they're diverse, but there's back in the day when you wanted to have diversity on a show, you usually had a minority character, and then there was that character that was in a wheelchair. It was always the kid wheelie or whatever.
Yeah.
You get someone who embodies 3 or 4 characteristics. It's you've checked the box and now you can move on because hey diversity, and she packed the whole story full of the Burger King Kids Club diversity kid, which is like, you make a good point. Maybe she did it to tick them off. As a reader, it was just kind of, okay, wait a second. It just like, it snapped me out of like my reading when I got to the Bronx, and I was like,
It's
if
hard to
this,
do justice to every characteristic.
yes.
If you're packing in all the characteristics.
But the odd thing about the Bronx is that like, she's not exactly, she identifies in her later years as a lesbian, but she's got a deceased ex-husband. She's got a kid. Not that obviously lesbians have children, but it was just interesting seeing her evolution in her past. Like, hey, like, I did get married, and we both decided that actually we were gay, and we had a kid together, and I identified I'm a butch dyke, and it was just an interesting journey, just sort of like with Manhattan, was shoehorned in there, and it would have been nice to have that like time to explore the background without it feeling quite so rushed. Because like, I came away feeling like, wait a minute, you said this character is a lesbian, and if she's showing up at the Stonewall riots, she's probably been a
A
lesbian
lesbian for a long time. Yeah.
yet she had this whole veneer of at least marrying someone else and going through the motions. And so it's like, this seems like a very complex character that we're not doing exact justice to because we're rushing through it.
Do you feel that the villain was done wrong in that it put too much time pressure on the story and forced the story to rush as opposed to actually fleshing out the characters?
I think, I don't think the villain was done wrong. I think that we sort of really delve into the backgrounds of some characters and then not other ones for the sake of the story, but a lot happens, and she does a lot more telling, I feel like, than showing, because like, everyone has these like, these like reverie moments where like, oh, and now I'm gonna remember all these things that make my personality, but we're not showing that personality. I mean, we sort of do with the Bronx and Manhattan and Brooklyn, but like in Staten Island, but we don't really show it. It's a lot more as like it's being described, and I felt like that was sort of a weakness in the book because they sound like interesting characters, and maybe it could have been arranged differently to get that background, especially with the way that everyone, I'm not going to say they're all so diverse, but it was just kind of like, at some point I sat there and I did the math and I was like, wait, 4 out of 6 of the avatars are LGBTQ. And I was like, okay, that's an interesting way to think of New York, because New York is definitely an interesting place. Like, historically, lots of people who were LGBT would go to New York to find themselves and freedom. So I get that, but it was just sort of interesting to see it from the perspective being written about from the perspective of people of color and how it's dealt with in their stories, but it all just seems so crammed in there. But I liked some of it,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard to quite calibrate exactly what you like about the portrayals in some sense when there's so much that's positive in terms of what she's trying to do, and there are just aspects that don't quite work for you, but you want to recognize the whole as being greater than the sum of its parts in some sense.
Well, I feel like there's a lot of good parts. It's just that I don't know if it makes quite a complete whole.
Okay.
Like, I like the parts, like, and I was like, I want more of these parts, but how does this work in the whole picture? But
Gotcha.
the woman in white, the monster, like, that was an interesting creature. Brian, you had asked like if I thought it was done badly. I thought it was good, but the thing I didn't like is that we were leaning on Lovecraft here.
Yeah.
And that she has to go out of her way to say, well, this is like alt artists, like this is Lovecraftian bullshit, or hey, this is a Lovecraftian monster. Or you could write about it, and like that felt like sort of like a shortcut to me. But
yeah.
Well, I also thought that it was her trying to say clearly that this particular writer that a lot of people in the sci-fi genre like to venerate is someone that should not be venerated and morally gatekeep in a way, while at the same time not being particularly descriptive.
I mean,
Okay.
and the thing about Lovecraft is like he was obviously a virulently racist and homophobic person, even by the standards of his time.
Mm-hmm.
But he also made recognizable contributions to the art of literature, and you can't necessarily separate that. But I mean, that doesn't invalidate the art as long as you're aware that it comes from a place of xenophobia, ignorance, fear.
Which is a
I
whole
mean,
other thing that HBO series Lovecraft Country is going to be getting into.
I'm curious to see how that turns out.
I am too. And, you know, and I think it's interesting to see that repositioned with Lovecraft stories from a Black perspective. But it is interesting how she calls out Lovecraft in particular here.
but I think the big themes are fear of the other and fear of the self, right? And I feel like those should also be themes when you're talking about a city.
Mm-hmm.
Bad things that may happen in your neighborhood, fear of invaders from other neighborhoods moving in and making your neighborhood unlivable.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether that was really.
Oh, that was in
really...
there. That was in there
But I
with
mean,
Island.
Staten Island is interesting.
Yeah.
But is it actually representative of Staten Island? Because Staten Island is more, I think, more diverse than that representation.
I think it's absolutely more diverse. It's just that NK Jemisin was trying to portray someone out of these avatars as being white and maybe potentially somewhat relatable and yet wrong.
I don't know how relatable she was.
Well,
that's what I was thinking.
You know, you think when you first meet her that you might have some sympathy for her, somewhat maybe just because of her circumstances, and then
I don't know. I feel like I've met her.
Oh, I know like I've met her. I know I've met her. I know.
But the question is whether she's Staten Island. She's certainly some people on Staten Island.
Yeah.
But is she Staten Island?
But she's some people on every borough.
Yeah, I mean, she's some people in my area of Brooklyn.
Yeah.
She's lots of people in Manhattan. Right now, the Upper West Side is freaking out about homeless people being housed in hotels and how it's
been going on for years.
Yeah, but it's more now because the city is trying to relieve pressure on homeless shelters where social distancing is impossible because they're horrible places.
Yeah.
Putting these people up in hotels like they're humans or something. There's a certain like subset of New York Post reading Upper West Siders who are freaking out about like it's going to destroy the neighborhood. Their kids aren't safe. They're all child molesters and they're all druggies and they're gonna attack me and whatever. And that's very much the Staten Island character, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're on the Upper West Side. They're not on Staten Island. They've probably never been to Staten Island.
But there are those people in Staten Island too.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And who definitely do think of Manhattan as that godless place across the.
Yeah, and when I think about like the Police Benevolent Association or whatever, the PBA, I think of their members as her dad.
I thought her dad was interesting it was sort of like, for me, I was reading the dad character and I thought, like, does someone like this really still exist in the 21st century?
Oh, yes.
Like,
yes, they do.
I know they do, but it's just, it's interesting to see it. And I'm thinking like, wow, like this is like a cartoon racist. I know they exist. I've met them, but it's just sort of like, it was an interesting choice. And that the fact that he controls her life so much. There's that part where she sits with her mom and her mom talks about how she got into Juilliard on scholarship, apparently, got an abortion, and then decided, oh, well, you know, I felt guilty. And that just blew my mind. I was just like, no one says that. Like, I feel like Juilliard would have come looking for you and said, hey, you did get a scholarship to Juilliard. Come on, like, we'll take care of this.
That's not how Juilliard works, but okay.
Well, I mean, it's Juilliard. It's like Hogwarts of music or something. Like, but I had a hard time buying that these things happen. I mean, I know they do, and that like her father was able to so completely control her life at 30. She still somehow managed to be so ignorant. And I like I said, I know those people, but it was just an interesting how narrow-minded she was in the story compared to the other avatars, and they immediately come together, but they also don't think about her until like
she's
the
an
last minute.
afterthought.
There,
And
there
so,
was an element to truth of the horrible murmurings from the woman in white trying to
right.
turn Staten Island to her side.
Am I the only one who had the sense that after her mom told her the whole anecdote about Juilliard, that there was this thought that maybe she could actually turn out to be a sympathetic character and actually change, and perhaps after realizing how horrible her father's choices for her have been all along, that she would go along and join with the other avatars as one happy family.
Thought was going to happen. Yeah, when I read that part, I thought, okay, so she's heard her mom's story and she's going to have the courage to get on that ferry and go to Manhattan and find them. And yeah, I was sort of. It was a while before I realized, oh no, that's not going to happen. She's just going to stay
And
separated from them, which was an odd choice.
actually, I liked that choice. I'll be very honest with you, because I think that took a lot of bravery on NK Jemisin's part to make it clear that characters that you may feel some sympathy with and who you may think might be on a positive trajectory cannot overcome their upbringing and cannot overcome the prejudice that has been hammered into them for 30 years to suddenly change enough to actually be brave and make a risky decision that actually would further them.
I mean, that's a good decision for storytelling.
I think it's also important as a distinction to make when you think about people who are white allies. I think what her point is, when she wrote this book, she was going for kind of the same thing that Jordan Peele was going for in Get Out. She deliberately didn't want there to be any positive representations of white people per se.
But is that a good choice in basically an advocacy piece?
Well, that's the question. But I want to kind of have you guys answer me this. Would you consider it a better piece if she had chosen to join in and just reverse, 30 years of inculcation of racism and anti-immigrant propaganda?
I think it would have been a bit more hopeful at the end if maybe she was willing to just take the step towards it. Like if the book had ended with her taking a step towards joining them or recognizing some of the things. But it's like she's never presented that choice. Like she never really seems to get that opportunity to either learn more about the other avatars or venture from New York. She just seems to like double down on her
You think
fear
that's
and
the
hatred.
point?
Yeah, I think that very well could be the point, that she has decided to double down and, like you said, like keep her ignorance. It could have been an opportunity for her to overcome her fear, but maybe, like you said, the point is that it's not that easy. You don't just like, maybe she needs more to take the step. Like I can tell you all sorts of stories from high school. I went to a predominantly white high school, and the stupid things people said to me then, I can only hope they don't believe now, 20 years later. But who knows?
Well, I thought people were changing up until partway through the Obama administration, when people were still going at him clearly only because he was black, right? And then I further lost my faith in other people around me when Trump got elected and the things around that. I mean, maybe people were being overly hopeful about discrimination and racism and things like that in the U.S.
Well, I was just thinking that, like, 3 million more people voted for Hillary, so that gives me some hope for the future. And
But only
two,
3 more million.
only three, but I mean, I Hillary herself was such a polarizing character that
Sure.
so many people dislike her, and for sure, like people have come out of the woodworks. They feel empowered to show their dislike and hate, but mostly more people are going, wait, this isn't okay.
Yeah.
And this is wrong. And that's what I mean, I feel like I have to keep a hope that we're going to move away from that. I don't know if we will, but
I think that there's a lot of Americans who at least want to be better, but there's at least a third of Americans who are probably horribly racist. They're okay at the very least with horrible racism. They're okay with disenfranchising people, hating on the poor, looking at all people who aren't them as the same, you know?
Can I address one thing here, though, which is that we're kind of talking about racism as a good bad binary when it's not really that. Racism as a whole is a construct that was used to support the privilege of middle and upper income white people. And we talk about it in terms of this good bad binary of like, no, you're a horrible racist because you yell out slurs and you discriminate in, very clear cut ways and so forth. But there are people who are very good people and very well intentioned who can also be racist too. And I think those are the people who.
But I don't view racism or racial bias that way. I mean, I view racial bias as something that is unfortunately baked into the human brain, where people favor their in-group and
Well, this is not
don't view
racial
other
bias.
Right, but I mean the racial bias, the system of racism is to prop up that because one race was in power and was basically using other races to their ends and didn't see other races as people. But the racial biases are I think, to some degree, a biological thing that people need to be aware of and overcome and consciously reject.
I agree, but that's kind of not my point.
But it's part of the book, I think.
It is part of the book for sure, but racism is also a part of the book, which is to say that even when Island is not completely 100% under the thumb of the Karen monster or her father, etc., she still has racism inherent in terms of everything that she's grown up with in terms of her systems, etc.
It's fear and it's othering and it's
the
all
fear,
very.
it's the othering, it's the marginalization, whether she says something outright or not. And unfortunately, in our country right now, we have a lot of polarization, but the problem is that both ends of the spectrum are othering each other so much that we're constantly using this good bad binary model of racism to call the other side racist, when in fact there's a lot of space in the middle, and there are a lot of people on the liberal and a lot of people on the conservative side who are racist, and some of them are trying to do something about it and confront their own privilege and change the status quo. But there are also people who are not working toward actually changing their privilege.
But I think the book actually touches on that because, like,
yeah, that's my point.
There's ostensibly liberal people from other boroughs in Staten Island who are being horribly racist.
Yeah.
But
when you even say that, horribly racist, like that again makes it sound like a good bad binary.
But it's definitely a bad thing to do. Even if you do good things, when you're racist, it's doing a bad thing, right? I mean, just treating people badly because of what they are instead of who they are is, I think, inherently bad. right?
Agreed. But
But boy,
Alex, feel free to talk.
I feel like this is a third rail.
I'm here to absolve you of all your guilt. No,
No, you don't have to do that, Alex. Please, God, don't do that.
I can't do that. But you guys have good points, but I think what she's not showing is an ability for Staten Island to grow. And like you said, as you talk about it more, maybe it is a conscious decision that she's doing that, because historically in literature and pop culture, usually there's like, for a character to be redeemable when it comes to racism or how they perceive other people, there's usually that grain where they can sort of see the error of their ways. But if she can't see that yet, then how can she grow?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I just assume that happens in book 2 or something like that. But it just, for me, it comes back to that her father just has hit her so under his thumb that she just never, he monitors where she goes, like where she, who she interacts with, who she works with. And that reminds me very much of like other situations that I've heard about, where you have people who grew up in households where they saw people who weren't white as inferior, and they talk about this, their parents didn't let them play with other, kids who weren't white, and they kept them away from other people. They decided that they could only go to certain schools because it's almost as if they knew, their parents knew, that if they ever were exposed to more people, that they would eventually change their mind, and decide that other people were not inferior, that there had to be more to the story and they should at least investigate it. And I think that it's, I think for the way Staten Island is written, I think we need a little bit more to sort of flesh it out, because like you said, like Staten Island is fairly diverse. So she would have had to have gone to like an all-white Catholic school, and then the College of Staten Island, I don't think is all white. I find it very hard that she could have existed in an all-white space this whole time and not been exposed to other people. Like, this is like an extraordinary effort on her dad's part, if that's the case. And that I think was sort of like, it made me think, because like I said, I've met people like that. People who ask you like, is your skin, like, you meet a kid, like, for example, they go like, is your skin dirty? And you're like, well, okay, hold on a second. First you're offended, you go, wait, have you really never seen a black person before? And you figure it out. But I just kind of wonder, like, really, has she somehow managed to exist on Staten Island?
But I think there's also a thing where, and I think it's part of the character, where some people, they need to feel like somebody else is inferior so they're not the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
We may have problems, but we're trying. Like, it's not like the godless people in Manhattan and Brooklyn, right? I think maybe there was a neglect of the centrality of those problems. Like, the whole thing is, I'm not doing great and my community's not doing great, and economically we're having trouble. It must be because of those inferior people taking from us, and we're not at the bottom because those other people are inferior, right?
Mm.
And I'm not. I don't know. I feel like a big part of the whole Staten Island dynamic, with like editorials that I've read about the other boroughs that were written by Staten Islanders and things like that, is an inferiority complex, and it definitely touched on it. Like, well, they're not going to come for you. They don't care that you exist, right?
So we haven't talked about Queens at all yet. I had some issues with the representation of Queens, but I don't know if anyone else did. My biggest concern was this idea of taking the South Asian student, immigrant representing the up and coming immigrants within the neighborhood, but then specifically making her good at math. I'm sorry. That really cheesed me off.
But Ariel, like every character in this book is like that. Like
I
all five
know, but
boroughs.
it is so cringy.
So that was the one that pushed you over. Like I said, like a
as a
Native American
teacher,
artist.
like that. Well, because that occurs before Bronx does her dance.
Right.
So that was the one that pushed me over first.
I
So
felt like Queens got shortchanged. I felt
totally
like
got shortchanged. She has
she
no personality, really.
she's kind of mousy, but like she doesn't have a ton of personality. She seems like more of a secondary or even tertiary character. Jersey City had more personality.
It's true.
Queens is the biggest borough in New York
right.
City. And
Yeah.
it's got the most probably diversity of, it's just such a diverse borough. Queens is so big, maybe it's hard to personify. I don't know.
I thought that like I didn't mind so much that she was an immigrant because I think that of the 6 avatars, she's the only one that is an immigrant, right?
Right, right.
Which is sort of odd because, you know, New York has so many immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought it was interesting, like you said, like the math was like, okay, really?
Yeah.
And it's every character is like that, but it's I think you're right that in some ways she's trying to create this diverse group of characters as sort of like a thumb up the nose to like the sad puppies, and it's great. But then she always adds in like this one characteristic that like takes it into like the cliche territory. Really, I felt like hit some cliche landness, especially because like Queens doesn't get much other characterization.
Mm-hmm.
And she only uses her math. Well, almost I think everyone only uses their powers like once essentially.
Yeah,
In the
except
book.
for the Bronx. The Bronx
Right.
gets to be a badass in multiple ways. So
I feel like there could have been potential to the whole math thing.
yeah, if they'd
a
had
power.
her
for sure.
juice, I mean, there's clear ways she could have done a lot more with it, but that never happened. So, and it never became related to her personality really at all. It was just sort of
What
a
she
characteristic.
Queens is an immigrant. She's living there. You know, it's not clear if she came over as a college student to work, you know, to go to school and then work, or if she immigrated earlier. Because I think one thing that would have been an interesting aspect to talk about is like if maybe she had come over as a younger kid living with her aunt and her uncle, and then she was there to like cram and get into one of those highly prized New York high schools that you have to test into.
Yeah.
And then that would have made her more part of the New York story.
And that's been a whole thing lately, by the way.
Oh no, I know. I follow a lot of the education stuff.
And she could have talked about voluntary versus involuntary minorities in the history of New York. And, you know, I think that could have been a very interesting conversation to have had she gone there. So I agree with you, Alex. I think that's a good point.
Because when I first read that description, I thought, okay, like I wonder if she's one of these kids who came, like your family invests all this money in getting you tutored and to get you through this exam so you can get into like one of these top New York high schools, because then you're set. The idea is that you get into like the college you want, you're good to go. And I was wondering if that was going to be something she touched on. But I also know that if you don't follow education news and things like that, that might not mean much to you as like an average reader.
I don't know. I feel like it would mean something to you as a New Yorker, because not only has the regents and the specialized high schools and things like that, not only has it been all over the news in like all of the newspapers, but at least in my neighborhood, there's been posters up everywhere about the racism of ending testing-based admissions to these specialized schools. And then I'm sure in other places there's posters up about the racism of relying on testing where it's difficult to get tutoring to do well on the tests. And like it's been a lightning rod issue in the city. And I feel like for a New York based thing, it might have been an interesting thing to integrate.
But I think it's also wider than New York, so a wider audience of readership would still get it.
Like it would resonate here.
It would certainly resonate here, but it would also resonate, I think, with a lot of places across the country that have charter schools and magnet schools that are specifically set up with admissions-based testing. And additionally, I just want to give a quick shout out to another podcast, the Nice White Parents podcast, which just had an episode on the topic of charter schools and how these admissions practices are gatekeeping to keep out students of color and so forth. And that could have been an interesting conversation too.
I think the education part would have resonated because like here, like, you know, we have sort of the same thing. There's Thomas Jefferson High School, and, you know, people have their kids in tutoring starting like in second, third grade. And they tutor their kids for 5-6 years with the idea that they're going to like get into Thomas Jefferson High School and I know the same
That
thing.
Can't be fun as a kid. That can't be fun as a kid.
Like, you know, everyone comes, like all the articles that talk about it always come back to like that culturally South Asians and East Asians are very much like, hey, this is a sacrifice that you make to succeed. We expect it of you. We've invested in you. And the argument has always been on the other side, like you said, like in the other neighborhood where the poster will say, hey, those tests are racist. It's because other people can't afford to get that tutoring, or you can't get access to the tutoring. Maybe you could afford it, but like you said, there's some gatekeeping happening where like the tutoring classes are happening in Korean and English. So no, you can't go. And I think that would have been an interesting thing to delve into to flesh out Queens because she's so thin. But I mean, you only have so much space in a book, and that could be a whole, you could probably write a whole sci-fi novel on those things in of itself. And I almost wanted the group to come across a group of people who were like warring, you know, potential avatars that like just didn't make it. Like
what, like from Brooklyn, one avatar is East New York, and one avatar is Park Slope.
Yeah. Or like I said with the rap battle, I kept wanting there to be some kind of other thing. Where's the Beastie Boys avatar? Like, it's like you said, it's just so hard to think of like one type of person to represent such a, you know, millions of people, millions of very diverse people. But
I wonder whether we want too much from this book, though. It's a really hard thing to do.
Well, it's NK Jemisin. I feel like, you know, you win 3 Hugos and we all want you to write like the best thing ever. So yeah, I probably want too much from this book. Coming out of, I read Broken Earth, like all of them. I thought they were great, and I was like, okay, this is going to be amazing, right? And it's not to say that it's a bad book per se. It's just that, like my expectations were so high.
To be fair, like in the foreword, she says this is the first book of this type that she's ever written, and that she had difficulty with writing a book about a place where she lives. And I feel like there's some honesty there.
You know, I think that's natural that you would have a lot of difficulty specifically writing about a place where you live. And I think she is deliberately trying to incorporate as many cultural experiences as she can pack into this book. And I think that unfortunately makes it very difficult for her to do enough authentic research than to invest all of those characters with quite the portrayals that you would want. And that's unfortunate, but at the same time, I really enjoyed the villainy of this book. I mean, I really enjoyed the metaphor of the alien interdimensional race that's going to make the city soulless and gentrify New York City within the universe itself and time stratosphere. And I think that having everything playing out in terms of the Karen trope on a galactic level is kind of a very interesting place to go with a sci-fi novel that I've never seen before. So I enjoyed that quite a lot.
I thought it was a fun book. Like, all my gripes aside, I actually thought it was a fun book to read.
I'm not quite finished with the book, so there have been a couple spoilers, but I've enjoyed it so far. I do think that sometimes the commentary becomes a little bit heavy, and and there should be showing and not telling. But it definitely has really good bones, and I actually like the characters. I thought that they were well constructed, despite maybe having too much. You know?
Well, I mean, but you can't really have too much diversity. It's just that I think
No, I mean like too much. Trying to make the characters be too much.
that's what I mean. Like they, in and of themselves, like they're like these like full cups of diversity, like sexually, like ethnically, and at that part, I like it always just felt like, okay, wow, you're pushing a lot, but it's good. This representation being there is good. It's just sort of how much do you need, and how is it handled? I think that was it really more for me. It's just like how it's handled and how it's portrayed.
I mean, it can come up more organically. You don't need to have the characters explaining themselves. You can just have situations that expose things about the characters, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think we're all in agreement that we wish there had been more backstory about these characters that actually made it more organic as a process to reveal who they were in these diverse ways.
Like maybe it would have been good to have Brooklyn. We don't know that she's a rapper until she gets into the rap battle, and it turns out that she grew up that when she was younger she was a rapper, a famous rapper, right?
Apparently, like everyone just recognizes her. They just look at her and like, oh, hey, you're MC Free. She's like, oh yeah, I guess I am.
Which I'm not sure I buy, because like the way that people look and sound changes a lot over time. So if you were like a rapper years and years and years ago, when you were very young and you haven't rapped since, like, are people really going to recognize you?
And if they did, would they elect you councilwoman?
Oh, no, I definitely think they would. Like,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, one of the people I thought of, like, and this isn't, I was trying to figure out like who her inspiration for MC Free was, and the first person I thought of was either like Queen Latifah or maybe MC Light, and I don't know.
I was thinking MC Light first.
Yeah, I was like, I wonder if this is because MC Light's from Brooklyn. I know Queen Latifah's from New York too. But I was thinking, like, is she talking about MC Light? And then I went and Googled MC Light. She's not in politics or anything like that. But that was my first thought. I was like, oh, this is probably some kind of MC Light callback, because MC Light had some lyrics.
Yeah.
Back in the day that were like, that went there, kind of in the way that the Bronx calls out MC Free and says, hey, you said these things, and I mean, like, I'm not gonna say that MC Light's lyrics were like, but she had some explicit lyrics.
Yeah.
And I mean, paving the way for, I guess, Cardi B and all those people. And
I've really enjoyed all of the probably fake outrage about WAP or WAP or whatever song. I've really enjoyed the outrage. I thought the song was okay, but the outrage is just excellent.
Yeah. So later on in the book, when they're trying to get to somewhere, I guess they're driving. I think they were trying to get to Staten Island, and they're driving around, and there's all the Starbucks. And I kept thinking, like, in this whole like city construct, yeah, a Starbucks in New York is a foreign thing that should, I guess, as corny as it is, rightly sap the city of its power. But I almost wanted to, there to be some line about how every time the Starbucks is in New York or somewhere else in the world, Seattle gets stronger. It's like, because that's specifically a Seattle thing that's spread across the world. Yeah. And I feel like there should be like this, ley line that provides Seattle with power everywhere. I
like that idea.
Do we think that there's going to be a City We Became too, or?
Oh, we know there is.
Oh yeah,
this is part of a cities trilogy.
So is it going to be other cities, or is it going to be in? I actually was not aware of this. Is it going to be other cities, or is it going to be in New York, or?
Don't know.
Interesting.
In the meantime, I want to thank you both so much for having a chat about this book. And I just love that we come at it from so many different angles, and that you guys were able to provide so much insight about the boroughs of New York City, because I think that's an essential thing to kind of get the full flavor of this book. So thank you so much. Thank you for joining us on Ride the Omnibus. We can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter as @OmnibusRide. If you liked the episode, take a minute to review us on iTunes or Podchaser. It means the world to us because it brings us to the world. Thank you.